Hello and welcome to another episode of Secondhand Stories. This is a place where I tell you stories. What kind? Well, histories, mysteries, and unbelievistries. And today's story is the absolute epitome of an unbelievistry. This is the very kind of story that word was even coined for. And here is how it goes. Our story begins with this one particular movie that came out in the year 1985. This movie was called Pulga Sari, and this movie was a cheap rip-off of another more famous cult classic from Japan, a movie called Godzilla. Pulga Sari was an interesting movie and it became a cult classic in its own right, but not just because of what was in the movie. No. It became a cult classic because of what was behind the movie. This is one of those rare movies where the making of the movie was far, far more interesting than the movie itself. Because the making of the movie had all the elements that you need in a classic. It had heroes who battled against the odds. It had action, it had drama, it had romance, it had violence, and most importantly, it had an iconic villain with an unbelievable evil master plan. This is the story of this particular movie. To understand the story of Pulga Sari, we need to go several decades before 1985. And we are now in South Korea. In South Korea, there was this actress called Choi Eun-Hee. Choi Eun-Hee began acting in 1947. And very soon, she became a very popular actress. She was not just a popular actress, she was also critically very well received. She was one of the absolute stars of South Korea. In 1954, she marries an upcoming director. This man's name was Shin Sang-ok. The two of them get married. Now, at the time that they got married, Shin was not a very well-known director. But soon after the marriage, they formed a partnership that proved to be critically and commercially unbelievable. They were just on fire. They started producing films where Shin would direct and Choi would act, and each film was a bigger hit than the last. Soon they were the most glamorous, the most powerful couple in South Korea. The 1960s were dominated by these two. Shin and Choi were the golden couple. Nothing they did went wrong. Throughout the 1960s, Shin was also a very prolific director. He would produce in that one decade of the 60s 300 films. However, in the 1970s, things took a turn. Here's what happened. The higher you go, the harder you fall. And in the 1970s, two things happened pretty close to each other. The first was this. Shin had an affair with an actress who was younger than Choi, and he had a child out of wedlock. Choi discovers this infidelity. She's heartbroken, and although they got along very, very well, she took the absolutely difficult step of separating from him. Now, the two of them divorced and they went their separate ways, but they were linked still together because of a deep friendship that they shared. Soon after this, Shin suffers a very professional difficulty. As his star had risen, so had Shin's ego. It had inflated, and soon, by the 70s, he thought that he was invincible, that anything he did, he could get away with. Now, what happens is this. In the 70s, he makes a movie where there is a kiss in it. The South Korean censor board takes objection to this kiss. They ask him to remove it. But Shin is defiant. He believes that he doesn't have to listen to some censor board to make his movies. After all, he is the great Shin Sang-ok. And so he leaves it in. What this results in is a revocation of his license. He can no longer make films in South Korea. It's a tremendous blow. He loses everything that he has built because of 3 seconds of film. When this happens, it's a terrible blow, not just to Shin, but also to Choi, because their finances were still in many ways linked to their production company, Shin Films. And at this point in time, though Choi as a star is fading, she has started an acting school and there are several students in it, and now their futures are going to be jeopardized by the fact that she's lost all this money that was tied in Shin Films. Now it's around this time in 1978 that Choi Eun-Hee gets an offer. The offer is from a producer from Hong Kong. He calls her and tells her that he wants her to direct a movie. She runs this through Shin. She tells Shin that she's got this offer to direct a movie and she's asking his opinion whether she should do it or not. Shin is very suspicious. He tells her that, look, you have directed in the past, but you're primarily known as an actress. Why does someone who you don't know want you to direct? But Choi believes that this is just Shin's jealousy, his envy at not getting an opportunity to direct himself. She disregards his opinions and flies to Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, she meets the producer. His name is Wang Dong-il. She meets him and she has several discussions about the movie. And as they go around Hong Kong, she starts noticing something very, very odd. She starts noticing that there are 2 men. They are Chinese men who are constantly taking photographs of her. Now she notices this, but she's a superstar. Of course, there will be people who will take photographs. And so she doesn't think too much of it. Pretty soon, Wang tells her that they have to meet a business associate, and he drives her to a place called Repulse Bay. This is a bay area with a pier that leads into the water. He tells her that they have to get into a boat and ride 10 minutes to meet this business associate. She's at Repulse Bay next to the water, and again, this uneasiness starts bubbling up. Something doesn't feel right. As she looks around the bay, she sees that there is this motorboat that's parked nearby, and there are 4 men in it. They look extremely shady. As she spots them, one of the men turns to another, nods, and then before she can think or do anything, the 4 men have leapt out of the boat, grabbed her, sedated her, put her in the motorboat, and they drive off. She wakes up on a freighter. She's kept in this one hold, and a doctor comes in, repeatedly checks her, but she's not told what's happening to her. They sail for several days, and then this giant freighter comes to a stop. She's then put into a smaller boat which takes her to shore. Now when she gets to shore, there is a man waiting to receive her. He's a short man in his mid-30s. He's got his hair slicked back. And he says this. He says, "Thank you, Madam Choi. You must be tired after the journey. I am Kim Jong-Il." And that's when she realizes that she has been abducted by North Korea. She's taken from the pier to a villa. And when she enters this villa, she sees that it's the most luxurious villa that anyone can ever hope for. It has all the amenities and the features of a luxurious villa. But when she looks out the window, she sees that there is this high wall and it has barbed wires and there are armed guards outside. She realizes that she's not in a luxury villa. She's actually in a prison. She would be kept there for a very long time, and she would never be explained why she had been brought there. Every day for about 9 months, Kim Jong-il would check on her. He would send her gifts. But the reason for her abduction always remained elusive. And in this manner, not just months, but years go by. In these years, she would be kept hostage in the same place and she would be re-educated. What this meant was that she would be taught about North Korea and would be indoctrinated into the communism that was practiced in North Korea. It would be 5 long years that she would spend in this rigorous, restrictive routine. And then, one day, she is told to get ready in her finest clothes because she is going to a party. Throughout her stay, she had been called to several important parties that were thrown by Kim Jong-Il. In these parties, there would always be the highest of the officials of North Korea, the highest members of the Politburo. And she would be made to stand there and made to feel like some kind of trophy. So she wasn't surprised that she was invited for another one of these parties. What threw her off, though, was the kind of excitement and reverence that this particular party had, that they were insisting so heavily that she dress up in her finest because she was going to meet a very important guest. She gets ready and she goes to this party. At this party, eventually, she is introduced to the guest. The partygoers part and she sees across this room there is this tall, gaunt, emaciated, tired, harrowed-looking man. And soon she recognizes him. It's Shin Sang-ok. She can't believe it. After 5 years, she's seeing her estranged husband. Kim Jong-il is present and he tells her, "Why don't you hug him?" When he gives her this order, she has to do as he says. She embraces Shin. At first it's awkward, but then slowly they fall into each other's arms. Although it has been a long time and both of them have been clearly through a lot, the comfort eventually returns. Here's the more telling thing about this particular party. The date of this party was March 6th, 1983. If they had not gotten divorced, this day would be their 29th wedding anniversary. When the party ends, the two of them are given the freedom to go back to the villa together. When they go to the villa, they have so many questions for each other. They both want to ask so many things of each other. And so what they do is they head to the bathroom and they switch on the tap because they hope that the running water will obscure their conversations in case there is a listening device in this villa. As the water is running, so is the conversation. And Choi tells her side of the story. And then she asks Shin what happened to him. And that's when he tells her his side. Soon after her disappearance, Shin had been extremely worried. He had made several inquiries. He had flown to Hong Kong, met several people, and he had gotten a sense that something had gone horribly wrong. He had also found out that some of the people that she had met, they had connections to North Korea. But that's where the trail ended. There was nothing else that he could do. There was nowhere else that he could go. No way to get to her. Eventually, he had found himself back in Hong Kong on a completely unrelated work matter. And that's where he had been abducted. He had been abducted, put on the same freighter that she had been put on, and kept in the same hold. He was brought to North Korea and brought to another villa. This villa too was extremely luxurious, and they had laid out his favorite food on the table. There were clothes in the villa that were made to perfection to fit him. There was an incredible amount of detail and planning that had clearly gone into this abduction. But just like Choi, he wasn't told why he had been brought there. Unlike Choi, when Shin is brought to the villa, he has only one thought. And that thought was, how do I escape? He constantly plotted his escape and eventually he did it. He escaped not once but twice. And both times he was caught. When he was caught, he was punished for trying to escape. He was sent to a prison. This prison was called Prison Number 6, and conditions there were horrible. He was made to sit in a torture position. The torture position was where the prisoners sat cross-legged and they had to put their hands on their knees. They couldn't fully raise their heads and they had to sit motionless for 16 or 17 hours of the day. If you fell asleep, the guards would beat you because they reasoned that you had to stay awake so that you could repent. As he is in prison number 6, he also has a realization. And the realization is this: though they are being extremely harsh with him, they have still not killed him. He sees that there are other prisoners alongside him who do not get this kind of leeway. He realizes that whatever is going on, his life is at least assured because there is some plan behind it. He decides that his best chance of survival is to kind of give in and to understand where all of this was headed. And so he begins to do just that. He apologizes for his behavior and he says, "How do I repent?" He is made to write several letters to Kim Jong-Il and Kim Jong-il's father, Kim Il-sung. He writes these letters, says that he is repentant for his actions, that he was wrong in trying to escape, and now he is seeing the light. Soon his re-education begins. He starts learning about North Korea, their culture, the communism that is practiced there, and eventually he is told that he's going to be released. 2 weeks after that, he is told to get ready for a party. This was the same party where he met Choi. He had spent almost 5 years in captivity in some of the worst conditions that a person could possibly go through. And now here he was in this bathroom narrating all of this, just pouring it all out in front of his estranged wife. The two of them hug and they tell each other this. They say that we have spent our life directing and enacting other people. Now it's time to direct and enact our life so that we get out of this situation. They make a vow that whatever happens, the two of them will try to escape. It's at this point that I want you to meet the villains. To meet the villains, we first have to understand a little bit about the history of North Korea. It's very difficult to imagine this today, but there was a time, and there was a long time, where Korea was one unified nation. They had been a sovereign nation for several hundreds of years until 1910. In 1910, they were annexed by Japan and they were held as a territory of Japan until World War II. In World War II, Japan sides with the Axis powers and eventually they are defeated by the Allies. And when they are defeated, they are driven out of Korea too. When this happens, there is a vacuum and this is quickly filled by the USSR and the US. The USSR occupies the northern part of Korea and the US occupies the southern part. The idea was that this was going to be a temporary solution. Eventually, they would figure a way to unify both the sides. However, this became a permanent solution in 1950 when North Korea decides to invade South Korea. When this happens, they were cleanly divided at the 38th latitude, and when the invasion happens and the Korean War breaks out, the damage is irreparable. The two sides are now locked into a forever battle. There is a demilitarized zone, or the DMZ, that's created between two countries as a buffer, and the two countries go their separate ways. The Soviets elect Kim Il-sung, a rebel fighter who had been fighting against the Japanese too, as the president of North Korea, whereas the South Koreans go a different route. What happens is that eventually Kim Il-sung would start deviating from the Soviet Union and become a dictator, a full-blown true blue dictator. and he would have a son. His son was Kim Jong-Il, the primary villain of our story. At the time when our story takes place, Kim Il-sung was still alive, still the president of North Korea, but his son was being groomed to take his position. In 1966, Kim Jong-il had become the head of the propaganda and agitation department, and he was the director of the motion picture and arts division. The reason for this was because Kim Jong-il loved movies. He loved them with a passion. North Korea had eventually become extremely isolated and very restrictive, and movies would not be shown in the nation. That was for most people. Kim Jong-il, however, had smuggled in all the possible movies that you could smuggle in and had seen them all. He used to see a movie almost every day. He had a private collection that spanned about 20,000 movies. He would have a division that was just made for archival and retrieval purposes of these illegitimate movies. What that meant was that Kim Jong-il was also the most knowledgeable film person in all of North Korea. He had written a book on filmmaking, and this book would become the gospel in North Korea when it came to movie making. However, as time went by, he made a lot of movies, but he was disappointed by all of them because these movies were all ideological in nature. These were very shallow movies that always harped about the greatness of the leader and the greatness of North Korea versus any other country in the world. He also complained that all the workers who worked in these movies didn't work hard enough. He said this was because the state would provide for them regardless of how they performed. So he was extremely unhappy with the situation, and he decides to correct this by kidnapping the best director and the best actress from South Korea. Now he lays this plan out to them. He says that I have got you here and I will give you all the resources you want. In return, I want to see North Korea become a leading light when it comes to motion pictures. I want you to make award-winning, critically acclaimed, internationally recognized films. He wants to compete with Japan and some of the other powers that were making amazing movies. And so this responsibility falls to two unwilling people, Shin and Choi. When they hear this, they are taken aback, but they realize that they must do as he says if they are to get a chance to get out. So here's what would happen. Over the next 3 years, the two of them would go on to make 7 films in North Korea. And as they made these movies, they began to realize several different things. The first thing that Shin realized was that he was very grateful to be behind a camera again, to be making movies again. As much as he hated it, as much as he hated admitting it, Kim Jong-il was possibly the greatest producer a director could hope for. Because with Kim Jong-il, they just had to ask for something and he would give it to them. When they asked for snow for a particular sequence, Kim Jong-il flew down a helicopter to the top of a mountain, scooped up fresh snow and brought it back to the film set. When they needed extras for a scene, Kim Jong-il brought a division of the army and made them act in the movie. They asked Kim Jong-il on a whim whether they could get a train to blow up for a particular sequence in a movie. And Kim Jong-il provided exactly that. A train arrives loaded with explosives, and Shin is told that he has only one shot to get it right. This was more than Shin was ever expecting, and he gets this unbelievable shot. Another thing that they were eventually able to negotiate with Kim was this. They said that if you want these great, internationally recognizable movies, you need to give us some leeway when it comes to storytelling. And so Kim agreed, and these films were a little different from the ones that were produced in North Korea before. These didn't have that stringent ideological bent to them. They were fresher, more free stories. In fact, they would produce the first love story that was shown in North Korea. The 7 movies that Shin and Choi would end up making would be a diverse set of films that told different, engaging, and entertaining stories. These were stories that hadn't been seen in North Korea before. Sure, there were a few ideological movies, but they also made love stories and action movies and everything in between. These were stories that the people of North Korea were thirsting for. These weren't just bland state-sponsored movies. These were freer, fresher, more entertaining stories. Stories that people thronged the cinemas to see. And this was one of the other things that kept Shin and Choi going. They would later reveal that as they went through North Korea, they saw the conditions in which people lived, and they felt that by making these movies, they were adding a little bit of joy to the otherwise dour lives that the people of North Korea had to go through. The 7th film that they would make would be Pulgasari. Pulgasari was a movie that Kim really wanted to make after he saw the Japanese hit film Godzilla. He realized that he wanted to make something similar to this, and he goes to Shin and Choi and he tells them his idea, and they begin work on it. So they make a communist Godzilla, and to do this they had to get in the people who had worked on the actual Godzilla. So again, the crew that had worked on Godzilla were told that there is a movie that is being made in China, and they are requested to be a part of it. When they decide to go to this place, they are diverted to North Korea. So even this crew has been abducted to make this movie. The movie is made and it comes out in 1985, and it is a monster hit. The pun is intentional. So the movie is such a big hit that people who would defect from North Korea would later remember this particular movie, because they would say that people were so desperate to see it that there were stampedes in the cinema halls. That's how much euphoria was there around this movie. When Kim sees the movie, he is absolutely floored. He says, this is exactly the movie that I wanted to be made. Now at this point, they have spent 8 years in North Korea. 3 of them they have made movies in, and at long last, they believe that Kim fully trusts them. After Pulgasari, the next movie that they are going to work on is a biopic of Genghis Khan. Kim really admires Genghis Khan because I guess it takes a tyrant to know one. And as he proposes this idea, Shin too is excited by it because he's seen several of the biopics on Genghis Khan, and he knows that none of them could truly capture the soul of that great man. And so he decides that he's going to go all in into making this movie. It's at this point that Kim tells them that there is a problem. North Korea is bankrupt. They have no money to feed the people, and so definitely no money to make expensive biopics on Genghis Khan. Instead, he orders Shin and Choi to head to Vienna and try to woo some producers who could get on board. Now, this was done obviously to make the movie, but hopefully to also make the movie make money, which would help North Korea. So the 2 of them are then sent to Vienna, and they are sent with some of North Korea's most elite bodyguards, because Vienna is not part of the Iron Curtain. It's beyond it. Shin and Choi can sense an opportunity to maybe try to make a break for it, but they see that they are constantly surrounded by these bodyguards. They get to Vienna in 1986 and they stay at the Intercontinental Hotel. Now at this hotel, they're able to convince a person who works there to call the US Embassy and tell them that 2 people might get there soon enough and they need help. After this is done, they call up a friend. This friend is a Japanese reporter. His name is Akira Enoki. They tell him to come down to the Intercontinental for an interview. they relay this information back to North Korea, saying that they're going to be doing an interview with a Japanese journalist, and they would like to do this interview alone with this journalist. And they reason that if there are bodyguards in the room, then it won't look like the two of them have come to Vienna and are working with North Korea of their own free will. It'll look like they're being coerced. Strangely and fortunately for them, this reasoning is bought by their handlers in North Korea, and the bodyguards are told to back off. Now, on the day of the interview, Akira Enoki arrives at the Intercontinental in a taxi. He gets out of the taxi and he sees that Choi and Shin are waiting for him outside the Intercontinental. Just a little distance away are standing the bodyguards, keeping a close eye on the pair. Now, as Akira exits the taxi and is making his greetings to the two of them, Shin pushes him back into the cab, and he gets in alongside Choi and tells the driver to drive. The taxi speeds away from the Intercontinental. The bodyguards have seen what has happened. They have rushed to the spot, flagged down another taxi, a white taxi, gotten into it, and are in pursuit of the taxi in which Shin, Choi, and Enoki are sitting. In the taxi, Shin is quickly and furiously telling Akira Enoki everything that's happened. He says that, look, we've been held hostage by North Korea and we need to get out. You need to help us. Drive us to the embassy. Now, as they're driving, they get one piece of luck. Here's what happens. Their taxi gets through an intersection just as the light turns red. The traffic light turns red and the bodyguards are left behind in the traffic. Now, as the car is going ahead, before anything else can happen, the radio in the taxi blares to life. The taxi company is asking their taxi where they're headed because their convoy needs this information to follow them. Before Shin can react, Akira Enoki pulls out a handful of cash, thrusts it in the Austrian driver's face and says, please give the wrong address. The driver takes the money, gives a wrong direction. And as he does this, they tell him to drive to the US embassy. The car starts driving to the embassy and they're frantically looking around because at any moment they feel that this white taxi will suddenly appear. They start getting close to the embassy, and as they take the last turn to get to the US embassy, their luck turns for the worse. Because on this last street, there is intense traffic. Cars are parked bumper to bumper. There is no way that they're going to get there in time. So, here's what Shin does. He turns to Akira and he tells them, just keep an eye on us. And without saying goodbye, he flings open his side of the door. Choi flings open her side. And the two of them get out of the car and start sprinting toward the US embassy. This distance was about 50 yards, but it feels like forever. They run and they run and they run, and finally they get to the embassy gates. And they constantly have this feeling that at this point, at any point, the bodyguards are going to leap out and stop them. But they're able to get through. They enter the embassy, they tell the receptionist who they are, and then they see the doors shut behind them. They will fully not relax until they are finally taken out of the country and taken to the United States of America. In the US, they are held and they're interrogated by the CIA because they have incredible information. They have been very close to Kim Jong-Il for a very long time. They disclose all this information in exchange for immunity. They would eventually be let off by the CIA and given a chance to live in America. They would return to making films and eventually find their way back to South Korea too. And at the end of this story, there is classic happy ending. Shin and Choi were two people who had been through a lot and had eventually reached a point where they were going their separate ways. But little did they know that fate had something completely different planned for them. They would eventually be brought together and go through a whole lot more before they realized just how lucky they were to have each other. They would end up remarrying, and would stay married until Shin's death. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then please leave a like and a comment. If there are other stories like this one that you'd like me to cover, then also leave them in the comment section below. As usual, every single episode of Secondhand Stories is shot in front of a live audience. All of these people have been abducted for this exact recording. If you too would like to be abducted for these sessions, all you have to do is become a member of the channel. That's it from this episode. Until next time, take care and bye-bye.